What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about what the police are like in Canada and some of the different rights that Canadian cops have that are different from here in the United States. So, like most Americans, I really don't know anything about Canadian police or how your laws work. So, today, I thought it'd be really interesting to learn more about this and see how Canada compares to the United States when it comes to the police. So let's take a look.
If you're swerving while driving home and the cops are called, they might show up at your door after you get to your house. And in the United States, you have the right to not answer your door. But in Canada,
Right.
you may not have that same option.
What? Whoa. Really? This is interesting. Okay. So we're going to dive into some like specific situations here, some scenarios where you're swerving on the road, you're breaking the law, you're speeding, whatever, and the police follow you home and they knock on your door. And yes, from what I understand in the United States, in a lot of it depends on what state you're in, but you don't have to open your door or comply with certain things. And sounds like in Canada, you absolutely do have to.
This video from Micah Colbert shows a Canadian cop coming up to his house with an alcohol screening device.
Huh.
This is legal.
I'm here to administer an alcohol screening device.
Unfortunately,
Wait, what? They came to his front door to do a breathalyzer? They're not even driving anymore. That's really... I've never heard of this situation before. I don't know if this is common in Canada. I've never heard of this in the US, where the cops come to your door after you've already gotten home to do a drug test, a breathalyzer for alcohol content. Yeah, I don't even know how that would work here because I've never heard of it. To be honest, here in the United States, a lot of Americans just have a lot of anxiety around the police. Unfortunately, in America here, the police have certainly a negative reputation in a lot of circumstances. It was really, really bad a few years ago. Certainly when the whole George Floyd and other big cases were happening and big news in the US, like trust in the police here was at an all-time low, and people were like scared to get pulled over or open the door for the cops, for example. And it sounds like in Canada, from what I can assess or gather here, you guys don't have that same trepidation or anxiety around the police, where Canadian police are just like there to help you and serve you and protect you, ideally, right?
Fortunately, the cop is just a regular cop, and not one of those cool guys in the awesome uniforms on horseback. And he's carrying a device like this. And why is he on Micah's doorstep to begin with?
I'm not sure where the complaint came from. Maybe you were on your phone.
No, I don't. No.
This happens
What did he just say? He doesn't know where what came from?
And why is he on Micah's doorstep to begin with?
I'm not sure where the complaint came from.
A complaint? A complaint? I'm so confused. Somebody complained about them at their house? And the police, the Canadian police, showed up with a breathalyzer? What is going on?
Maybe you were on your phone.
No, I don't. No.
This happened.
Oh, it was a complaint while he was driving. Somebody filed a complaint while he was driving? Or some cop saw him and filed a complaint? But they are not exactly sure what the complaint is? This really sounds kind of like wishy-washy sketchy to me. In the United States, I don't. Already, I think most people would be acting kind of like this guy is, where it's like, seriously? Dude? Like, someone filed a complaint, maybe? I was on my phone, or was I drinking, or what do you hear? Why at my house with a breathalyzer? This is strange to me. Maybe I'm missing something, or maybe, like, for Canadians, you understand what's going on better? I don't know.
This happens every day in the United States. Even in my own little backwater hamlet here in Virginia, the police routinely show up to someone's house and knock on the door due to a complaint that they were driving poorly on their way home.
What? I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with this. I know this guy's like a lawyer and everything. Maybe he's privy to information that I'm not, but you know, I'm an American and living in the United States my entire life in multiple states. I've never heard of the police showing up to your house to give a breathalyzer. Huh? If you get pulled over on the road, of course. Yeah, obviously. Like, if you're suspected of drunk driving, or, yeah, you should have to do, like, sobriety tests and the breathalyzer. But, hey, your house? He's trying to say this is normal. This is not normal in the U.S. This is not normal.
But what happens next astounds me.
Right now, I demand that you provide a sample of your breath into an approved screening device for proper
I was
analysis
so
of the breath
nervous.
to be made, and for you to accompany me for that purposes now.
You know, good for this guy for, like, filming himself, especially if he thinks something, like, unjust is going on here. So to be clear, this footage here is in Canada, and the Canadian cop showed up at the house to administer a breathalyzer. He's requesting the breathalyzer now. Can you do that? Do you have to comply with that? Seems unreasonable to me.
Is that a legal demand? Does Micah have to blow into this device even though he's already at his house, fully inside his home? In most states here in these United States, Micah would not have to blow into this handheld test once he's inside his home.
Wow. And you know what? Credit to him. He's complying. A lot of Americans have, you know, for better or for worse, an attitude of, like, sticking it to the man and not complying, especially if we think something is against the law, or if the cop is, like, stepping out of bounds, or, you know, something. I think it's just in a lot of people's nature, and maybe Canadians as well. But, you know, credit to this guy, especially if he has not been drinking, and he just wants to, you know, facilitate the whole thing and not cause a lot of trouble. He's recording it on his phone. That's good for his protection, and he's going ahead and doing it. But as the lawyer is saying, in the United States, you would not have to do this. I've never heard of anyone even requesting this. This is very strange to me, and I'm actually glad to hear if a random cop shows up at your house with a breathalyzer just saying, hey, somebody filed a complaint, that you don't have to comply, because that certainly seems like a breach of your rights and your privacy. Like, show me a warrant, or show me, like, something official. You know, somebody we think complained about a phone, I think. What?
In Virginia, he definitely never has to blow into a handheld test. Remember that, Virginians. But Canada is the home of maple syrup, St. Joseph's Oratory, and unfortunately, the oppressed. The DUI laws were amended there in 2018 to require peasants to submit to field...
Peasants? Oh my God. This is some pretty harsh language, I'm not going to lie. This lawyer thinks that Canadians are oppressed, actually. He goes that far. This is certainly interesting, and it's definitely a different take on the law and what should be required for people to comply with. So, what's with the word why are we using the word peasant, by the way? Anyway, normal people, peasants, I guess. We're just peasants now. The common folk, the common corn of the land, have to submit to requests like this? You have to. There's no choice.
to field sobriety testing and preliminary screening devices even if the officers do not catch them driving. 3
What? That seems odd to me. That's, just one random American guy's opinion, but this is strange. This seems like an overreach. Particularly the idea that when they don't even catch you in the act of doing it. So where do you draw the line? If you allow, I think that's my concern. If you allow this, where do you draw the line of, like, if they don't catch you for something, they can just accuse you and force you to do random tests? And I have no real issue with, like, what's going on here. It's not that big of a deal, but I guess it's just kind of a slippery slope.
20.27 subsection 1 says, if a police officer has reasonable grounds to suspect that a person has alcohol or a drug in their body and that the person has, within the preceding 3 hours, operated a conveyance, the police
What?
officer may, by demand, require the person to comply.
How do they know if you've been in a car in the last 3 hours? How do they know that? How would they know that? Now, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not just anti-police or anything. I have a lot of respect for police. It's a very tough job, and they're there to protect us and serve us, and it's very noble. And I understand, to a certain extent, the police need to operate under reasonable assumptions, or nothing would ever get done. You got to make some assumptions. You got to do so, or nothing would ever happen. If you just had to do it, like, see everything literally as it occurred, that's not realistic. But this is strange, I have to say.
The law goes on to require that peasants who the cops suspect have driven a vehicle and suspect may have a substance in their blood to submit to certain things.
Suspect? What's grounds for suspecting that you drove 3 hours ago? Like, if you own a car? if your car keys are still, like, swaying on the hook in your house, if they're still jingling from when you put them up, they're like, I think he was in it within 3 hours.
Such as perform the physical coordination tests, provide samples of breath, provide samples of a bodily substance.
What?
And the worst part is, you don't have to be under arrest for all of this to happen. The police can simply demand this testing simply because they were called due to a complaint that you may have been driving under the influence.
Whoa. I don't know how much of a problem this really is in Canada, how often this happens, but it certainly seems kind of disturbing that this is a thing. It's a complaint, which is just... Anybody can file a complaint, right? It doesn't even have to be true or accurate. And then based on that, they can force you to do tests? It's kind of strange.
And so what does Micah do? Well, because the police showed up to his doorstep and demanded it, and the laws are very different in Canada, my opinion is he did the right thing by submitting to the test.
I agree with that. Just to be clear, I think if the cop is, like, being reasonable and you don't have a personal problem, or, like, if it doesn't go against your personal moral ethical code or whatever, just, like, being reasonable and going along with it, something simple like this, especially if you have nothing to hide, I think that's probably a good decision as well.
Now, maybe there's a Canadian DUI lawyer who will disagree and explain why that's the wrong choice, but to me it appears that he did right.
Are you nervous?
Me? No, I'm not nervous. I already...
What? Okay, it's already kind of funny because the way he's interacting with the Canadian police is very different. Like, in the United States, you would never speak to an officer like that so casually. We just don't have the same level of comfort around our police. I think that's what I'm also noticing here.
Pass my test.
He was shaking.
They're laughing. They're laughing. They're having a good time. This really, like, it's actually kind of nice to see in Canada, like, even if I may disagree with some of the laws, that everybody's, like, getting along and being very cordial and friendly. That's really cool to see, because you don't always see that in America when it comes to police interactions.
So deep breath in.
Or was that me?
Seal and breathe out. Hard, hard, hard. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going,
Wow.
keep going. Perfect.
If this happens to you while on U.S. soil, the answer is easy. don't answer the door for the cops.
Oh my
If you
God.
mistakenly answer the door and you realize the police are there to potentially investigate you for a DUI, you can silently, quietly, politely close the door and stay in the house.
That is, it just goes to show you how differently we kind of interpret police in the United States, that you would even choose to do this. As an American, I like that this is an option, that legally you can close the door on the police. It's within your rights. Personally, I think that'd be kind of scary because it makes you look very, very guilty and weird, and it might escalate the situation. Because there's certainly been instances where American police have, just because you close the door doesn't mean they're going to just walk away and say, okay, all right, you got us, see ya. But it certainly is a huge difference between Canada and the U.S., isn't it?
Thanks to our Constitution here in the United States, the police cannot come into your home solely due to the suspicion that you may have driven drunk earlier in the day.
Yeah.
The police can only enter your home with a warrant or an exception to the warrant requirement. And mere
Right.
suspicion that you may have driven drunk is not going to be considered a legal exception unless there's some crazy scenario going on.
Right. Like you need some actual grounds, some proof to, go into somebody's home. That's a pretty big deal for me. Whereas in Canada, it sounds like if the police are knocking, you have to answer. And if they want you to do some of these tests, you have to do them. So it's just stricter.
But what would have happened to Micah in Canada if he had made the wrong choice and refused to submit to the officer's lawful demand at the door of his own home? In the land of bagged milk, if you're convicted of refusing a handheld breath test at the door of your own house, it carries the exact same punishments as if you were actually driving under the influence of alcohol.
What?
Which is backwards because the Canadian government is essentially assuming you're guilty and requiring you to prove your own innocence.
Wow, is this really the law? I guess this is why this lawyer made this whole video talking about this case. It's really interesting. And hearing this interpretation of it. It certainly makes it sound bad, to be honest. There's no choice in Canada. And maybe, there's got to be pros to that. I'm not saying it's all bad. Like, you're probably going to catch a higher percentage of drunk drivers and people who are going to fail the sobriety test. Having that much power as a police officer, you're going to catch more people. And maybe, you can argue that will lead to higher safety or dissuade Canadians from breaking the law if you know this is the consequence and that this is the repercussions, that the police can come to your home and test you in your home. Maybe it's more of a, it's going to convince more people to not break the law. So there's certainly some arguments to be made in favor of how Canada is doing it.
The punishment for refusing a handheld breath test in the U.S. definitely can vary based on your state's law. In most states, you never have to blow into one of these handheld tests. However, there are a very few states that do require it. If you open your door and talk to the police about your driving, it could be that those small minority of states might require you to blow into the handheld breath test on your doorstep.
Interesting. Now, just again, in general, my approach to this, no matter who you are or where you live, would just be, if you haven't broken the law, just do the stupid test and move on with your day. And, the cop's just there to do their job, you don't need to, give them a hard time about it, especially if they're following the rule of the law. But I think, as an American lawyer, he's kind of arguing, to the letter of the law, what you're allowed to do in regards to you're not technically forced to do it.
But in Virginia, you never have to blow into one of these little handheld gadgets. And what if you were driving sober, but got home and started drinking a little bit of Crown Royal, eh?
Yeah.
And then the police show up and demand that you blow into their inaccurate handheld test.
That's a really good point. That's a good point. You're innocent, but you got home and happen to have alcohol. And then they knock on your door and you have to test. In Canada, you would be like, that'd be proof that you were drunk driving, even though you weren't, right? So that's really God. That's really bad. That's a huge contradiction.
You're going to be sorry. In Canada, the law does provide an exception to try to keep you from being convicted of a DUI under these circumstances.
Okay.
However, the law appears to put the burden on you, the defendant, to prove that you were not under the influence at the time that you were actually driving up to
wow.
3 hours before your interaction with the police.
Wow.
You'll need a lawyer and most likely an expert toxicologist to come in to try to prove your innocence.
Wow. Wow. This seems like a major oversight.
And in the US, the same thing could happen if you speak with the police at your doorstep after arriving home. If you consume alcohol after driving, the police could still try to claim that you were drunk at the time of your driving, and you may still need to try to get an expert toxicologist
Wow.
to do what's called a retrograde extrapolation and try to prove that your blood alcohol when you were driving was actually lower than the legal limit and you were not impaired. So
my
what happened
God.
in Micah's case? What was his result?
And it's gonna think for a second.
And the results are.
It says you're.
Yeah. It's nice that this turned out to be like just a wholesome little funny video. The police are laughing. Oh my God, there's like 3 police officers. If this was the US, like, it would go down way differently. For one thing, it'd be very tense. It'd be scary. The police would not be so friendly and laughing, and that also kind of explains why a lot of Americans are so resistant and would be like, kind of, I don't know, causing conflict and being like, no, I don't want to take your test. I don't have to take your test. Go away, and slam the door. And it just, yeah, it's interesting because the result of this in Canada was actually a very good result. He was innocent, and his innocence was proved. And the officers, their time wasn't wasted. There we go, case closed, and they can go home or back on the job. And whereas in America, they'd have to like file a report, and you'd probably have to go in for like a hearing because you slammed the door on the cops, and the cops would have to show up and argue that, and it'd like take up more resources in a way. But we're also kind of arguing like what the line should be for like personal liberties and freedoms, and how much you should be forced to comply with, and that's tough.
Pound it.
Thankfully for Micah,
Pounded.
the complaint was unfounded. He didn't have anything to drink after he got home, and he blew zeros on the test.
Yeah, it's just annoying that like someone can file a complaint, send the police to your front door, and you have to take these breathalyzer tests even though you didn't do anything. Maybe that's just the price that you need to pay to live in a civilized society like Canada, and in order to keep the peace, you have to put up, it's not that much to ask to just like, okay, sometimes the reports are going to be unfounded or false. You just take the tests and prove your innocence, and that it doesn't have to be a long drawn out thing. And I actually really understand that point of view, the sort of the Canadian point of view. It's just that here in America, I think it's literally wired into our brains to like just resist and not comply with police if you don't have to, and to like not one single inconvenience can be put against you, or else like you have been wronged and the government and the police have wronged you. Whereas sometimes you just need to like just be a civil servant, a member of the community and take the darn breathalyzer. I honestly see both arguments. It's actually kind of hard to say.
And thankfully for us, we don't live in Canada. Although it's a fun place to visit, and I did learn how to ski there a few years ago.
Yeah, well, he seems vehemently against it. I actually see both ways. I can see both ways, the Canadian law and the American law, both having pros and cons, actually. So it's actually very, very interesting. Stuff that I've never really thought about before. And really, actually pretty cool to see how the Canadian legal system and police work in a way I've never learned about before. Really interesting. Anyway, If you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts, especially if you're Canadian and you have a perspective on this that maybe I'm not seeing, or I missed, or maybe agree with me, or you don't. That'd be all. Or maybe you don't agree. That'd be cool to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and seeing Canadian things I've never seen before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.